I always took the trash out on Tuesdays after putting the kids to bed. It wasn't superstition or method. It was that Priya sometimes woke up at noise, and the sound of the container lid in the garage was enough to undo 40 minutes of sleep routine. So I waited, let her fall into real sleep, that heavy sleep where the jaw goes slack, and only then I'd go downstairs, grab the black bag, drag the bin through the side access, and walk the 12 meters to the curb on Harrogate Circle. It was 10:47 p.m. that Tuesday. I remember because I'd checked my phone when I came down. There was a message from the hospital about a shift swap on Thursday, and I needed to respond before bed. Harrogate Estates sits on the east side of Knoxville, off Asheville Highway before the interchange toward the 640. 42 houses, all with the same vinyl siding in 3 shades of beige, all with the same 2-car garage and the same tree planted 6 feet from the sidewalk, like someone had used a stencil. I'd lived there for 6 years. I knew how the street looked at night. The lights on Harrogate Circle put out a weaker amber than the city standard, something from when they were installed in 2009, and there's a stretch between my house and the cul-de-sac where the light doesn't quite reach. A shadow band maybe 25 feet wide. I walked through it every trash night, every week, without thinking about it. That night was cold for October. Not the dry mountain cold that sometimes rolls down from Gatlinburg. It was a damp cold, smelling of wet leaves and turned earth. The kind of smell Tennessee gets when it rains 3 days straight, and then suddenly stops, and the ground hasn't dried out yet. It had rained on Monday. I noticed the smell because I was without a jacket and the humidity clung to my arms. I set the bin at the curb, straightened the lid, which had been sitting slightly crooked ever since the city truck clipped it back in August. I was about to head back inside when I noticed the silence. Not the normal silence of a residential street after 10. That one I knew. 1 or 2 cars on Asheville in the distance, some far-off dog. The low continuous hum of the city that never really goes away. This was different. It was like someone had turned a volume knob down. The crickets, which had been screaming since dusk because of the warmth that came before the rain, had gone quiet. Ruth Tamblin's dog, an old beagle named Pesto who barked at everything, was silent. The air was still. I stood there for a second. Not scared. More the way you stop when you're adjusting equipment at the hospital and something isn't sounding right, and you pause and recalibrate before moving on. Professional, not emotional. That's when I heard the cans. It was a dragging sound. Metallic, uneven, coming from the end of the cul-de-sac, from the direction of number 44, which had been empty for nearly 8 months, since the Bremers had left for Houston. A trash bin being pushed or tipped over on concrete. It lasted maybe 3 seconds and stopped. Raccoon or cat was what I thought. The bins at number 44 were still at the curb because the realty company had never had them collected. Some animal knocked one over. But then the porch lights at number 38 and number 40 went out. Not together exactly. One and then the other, maybe 2 seconds apart. Automatic motion sensor, which meant something had passed in front of both of them. I looked toward the end of the street. The wooden fence that separated the back of number 44 from the empty lot behind it. I could make out its silhouette, because the moon was partly covered but still throwing enough light to catch the faded white of the boards. There was something leaning against it, or on the other side, with part of its body coming up over the top. The fence was 6 feet tall. I know that because when I moved in, I asked Scott Fenimore, who lives on the curve and has the only lot that borders that land, and he said 6 feet, and that he'd never had to replace a board. Subdivision houses have standardized fences. 6 feet. What I was seeing on the other side looked too tall to just be leaning against it like that. Like the proportions weren't adding up. I watched for maybe 10 seconds. Then I stopped watching because Priya sometimes woke up in the middle of the night thirsty. And if I wasn't in the hallway, she'd start calling out in that voice that kept getting louder, which had the gift of waking Caleb too. And then both of them would be asking for water and talking for another hour. I went inside, responded to the hospital message, went to sleep. Pesto barked at 2 a.m. One single short bark and then stopped. That was unusual for him. Pesto either barked non-stop for 5 minutes or didn't bark at all. I noted it mentally as the strange thing it was and went back to sleep. The next morning I made pancakes for the kids and put Caleb on the bus and drove Priya to school at 7:40 and went straight to the hospital to catch my 8 o'clock shift. I didn't think about the cans. I didn't think about the shadow by the fence. I thought about the bark. Just that. One single bark at 2 in the morning from a dog that barked at everything, and I couldn't stop thinking that it hadn't sounded like a dog that saw something. It sounded like a dog that started to bark and then decided it wasn't a good idea to keep going. I've been working with images of living tissue for 15 years. I know what it's like to look at something on a screen and know, before any formal analysis, that something is not right. It's not intuition, it's pattern. It's the brain comparing what's in front of it against the archive of everything it's ever seen before, and flagging the divergence. That bark was a divergence. I didn't do anything with that information that day. I just went to work. On Wednesday morning, when I went to bring the bin back from the curb, I saw the lid was open. That wasn't unusual. The wind sometimes caught under the flap and flipped it, especially with the bent hinge. But the bin was almost 2 feet from where I'd left it. Not tipped over, not dragged sideways. Just shifted, as if someone had slowly pushed it in the direction of my garage, and stopped before getting there. The back wheel had scratched the sidewalk concrete, a thin white mark, maybe 5 feet long. I looked at it for a while. Then I looked at the neighbors' bins, all in place, all with their lids closed. I put mine back, closed the lid, went inside. I didn't tell anyone because there was nothing to tell. A shifted bin isn't news. It's wind, it's some car that clipped it pulling out early. It's the newspaper delivery guy making a wide turn. The neighborhood has 42 houses, and I know at least the faces of everyone who lives in them. And none of them struck me as the type to go out in the middle of the night pushing other people's trash around, which left the non-human options, and all of those were mundane. I took Priya to school, came back, drank my coffee standing up because I was running late for the afternoon shift. Priya had spilled milk on her shirt at breakfast, and I'd had to change her, and she'd decided she no longer liked the sneakers she wore every week, and would only go to school in the pink sandals that had a broken buckle. 12 minutes of negotiation. I'd arrived at the hospital with my hair still half wet. It was during my shift that I realized I'd been thinking about the smell. Not in any literary sense. I was processing images for a patient, a chest scan, and my mind went to the smell from Tuesday night. The dampness, the wet leaves, and then to something underneath it. Something I hadn't put a name to at the time but was now trying to name. Meat. It was meat, not barbecue, not something frying. It was the kind of smell that lingers in the butcher section of a grocery store that isn't cold enough. A dense, faintly metallic smell that sticks to the back of your throat. It had been faint, and I'd written it off as part of the general wet earth and organic matter smell, which is what Tennessee smells like in October. But now, reconstructing it, it was there. I made a note in my phone. Smell Tuesday night. Possible dead animal in the empty lot. Empty lots collect things. It's not unusual. I'd once called 311 myself about a dead possum in the gutter 2 houses down, and it took 11 days for them to pick it up. A medium-sized animal in the lot behind number 44 would explain the smell, would explain Pesto's behavior. I got off my shift at 6, picked up Priya from Ruth Tamblin's house where she spent some afternoons, and Ruth came to the door with that look she had when she wanted to talk, but was being polite about it. "Did you see anything strange last night?" she asked, not anxiously, with the tone of someone checking whether their own perception makes sense to another person. "What do you mean?" "Pesto's been restless all day today. Didn't eat right. Keeps sitting at the front window staring at the street." Pesto was 12 years old with arthritis in his back legs and spent most of his time sleeping on Ruth's kitchen rug. I didn't say that. "Could be an animal in the lot behind 44, I said. "I noticed a strange smell last night. I'll call 311 tomorrow." Ruth nodded but didn't look convinced. She'd lived there since the neighborhood was built in 2003 and had that quality of someone who's observed the same place for so long they start noticing variations everyone else ignores. I respected that, even when I disagreed with the interpretation. "Scott mentioned something too," she said, while Priya was already pulling at my hand. said his dog woke up twice in the night. Scott had a German shepherd named Ridge that I had never once heard make a single sound. That dog was so quiet, I sometimes forgot he existed. On Thursday morning, before taking the kids, I took a quick walk around the block. I didn't plan it. I was waiting for Caleb to finish tying his shoes and decided to wait outside instead of at the door. I walked slowly to the end of the cul-de-sac. The bins at number 44 had been knocked over. 2 of them were tipped on their sides, trash scattered. Paper, plastic packaging, a bag caught on the side fence. The third was upright but displaced, at least 12 feet from its original position, leaning against the side of the garage. That wasn't wind. Wind knocks things over, it doesn't shift them in different directions. I walked to the back fence. Up close, in the morning light, I could see more clearly. There was a mark on the wood. Not a scratch, not wear. It was pressure, a long, uneven indentation, as if something heavy had leaned its weight against the top board long enough to leave an impression. The wood was slightly bowed inward. I have a sense of force. I've worked with the human body my whole career. I know what muscles do and what they don't do. A treated wood fence board 6 feet tall doesn't bow like that from the pressure of a person with an average build. It takes weight and sustained force. I took a photo. I'm not entirely sure why. Reflex from someone who documents things for a living, maybe. I didn't send it to anyone. Caleb yelled from inside that he was ready. I went back, put the kids in the car, went to school, went to work. That day I processed 43 images. I didn't think about the fence for most of it, but at 5 in the afternoon, waiting for the elevator, I thought. The wood was bowed inward. The weight had come from outside the lot, from outside the subdivision, from the empty land sitting behind the fence, and whatever had leaned its weight against it had stayed on the outside, hadn't come in, yet. On Friday morning, I called 311 and reported a possible dead animal in the lot behind Harrogate Circle. The operator asked if I could see the animal. I said no. She asked if there was a persistent bad smell. I said yes, intermittent. She logged it and said someone would come out within 5 business days. 5 business days is Tennessee's way of saying, maybe next week, maybe not. I knew that. I'd been through it with the possum. So, on Friday afternoon, after picking up Priya and leaving both kids with Ruth, who loved the kids and whom I paid when I remembered, and who refused payment when she remembered, I walked over to number 44. I didn't go in. I stood on the sidewalk. The house was shut up the way it always was. Blinds down. Mail accumulated that the realty company had stopped collecting about 3 weeks back. The front lawn grass was tall, brown at the tips, with that look of something that grew without anyone wanting it to. The side access, a narrow corridor between the garage and the neighbor's fence, was blocked by one of the tipped bins I'd seen that morning. I went to the side access, moved the bin just enough to get through. The corridor smelled. That same smell again, stronger here, meat and metal, with something underneath it I couldn't quite name. Damp, like when you open a refrigerator that's been without power for days, but without the sweetness of advanced decomposition. Fresher than that, more recent. The backyard at number 44 was large by neighborhood standards. The Bremers had a pool that was covered with a green tarp, 2 concrete steps leading to a back door, and a wood deck that had already been needing maintenance when they left. The back fence was about 40 feet from the house. I approached the fence slowly. In the afternoon light, I could see clearly. The board I'd noticed Thursday morning was more bowed than I'd registered. Not considerably more, but there was a difference. As if the pressure had been applied again, or for longer. Below the pressure mark, at the base of the fence, there was mud. Tennessee in October has easy mud, especially after rain, but this mud was accumulated in a specific way, pushed inward toward the yard side, in 2 separate concentrations of maybe 16 inches each. I looked at those marks for a while, then I moved closer and crouched down. They weren't footprints, not exactly. The mud had been compressed in an uneven way, without the defined shape of a paw or a foot. But there was depth, I noticed that. Whoever had made those had considerable weight that sinks into wet mud, and the spacing between the 2 pressure points was wide, wider than any dog I knew. I took more photos, looked at the photo of the bowed board I'd taken on Thursday, and compared it with what I was seeing now. There was a detail I hadn't caught in the earlier photo. On the wood, just above the main pressure mark, something was caught in a knot in the board. Small tufts. Dark, almost black, irregular. Not the uniform coat of a dog or a cat, more sparse, with a different texture, like it came from an animal that had lost most of its fur, or that simply didn't have much to begin with. I picked up a stick from the ground, leftover popsicle stick or skewer, something from the Bremers, and carefully moved the tufts. They were soft but coarse, not smooth, not the kind of fur you touch and think of a pet. I guided it back against the wood and took a close-up photo. I left without going any further into the yard. Friday night, Caleb asked to sleep in the living room because he and his friend had made plans to stay on the phone playing some online game. And I said no. And there was a 20-minute argument that I lost because I was tired, and because 20 minutes was more than I had in me at that point. He slept in the living room. Priya fell asleep early after I read 2 chapters of a book about a girl who finds a secret door in a garden, which she loved, even though she'd already heard it 4 times. I stayed up until midnight doing nothing useful on my phone. At 11:18 p.m., I heard something outside. Not loud, a low, continuous, almost organic sound that lasted maybe 8 seconds and stopped. Not cans, not wind. It was more like the sound of pressure against a surface, like when you push against a door that won't open, and the wood protests. I went to the bedroom window which faced the backyard. I didn't turn the light on. I stood behind the curtain and looked out. The backyard was dark, the moon was covered. I didn't see anything, but the smell was there. Faint, coming through the gap of the window I left open 2 inches out of habit. Meat and metal and something further underneath that I still couldn't name. I closed the window, stood still in the dark of my bedroom for a moment, hands on the cold window frame, and found myself mentally running through the state of the locks. Front door, kitchen door, garage door that opened into the house, all locked. I always locked everything, not out of fear, out of habit, because I was the only adult in the house and there were 2 children sleeping, and the habit of closing everything before bed was as automatic as brushing my teeth. But this time I went to check again, physically. Went downstairs, touched each lock with my hand, confirmed. Everything locked. I went back to bed. Lay there looking at the ceiling for a stretch of time I can't accurately estimate. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Thinking about the marks in the mud, the spacing between them, the uneven fur caught in the wood. I analyze images for a living. I know how to reconstruct what I can't see from what I can. That mental exercise did not help me sleep. What helped was thinking about this. The fence was intact. Bowed, yes. Marked, yes. But intact. Whatever had been on the other side hadn't come in. Yet. I shouldn't have thought yet. That word had no business appearing. It showed up the same way you sometimes see an anomaly in an image before you have the language to describe it. The brain signals before consciousness catches up. I slept with my phone on the nightstand with the volume all the way up for the first time in years. Saturday morning I did what I do every Saturday morning. Woke up at 7 because Priya has no concept of weekends. Made breakfast for both kids, put a load of laundry in the machine, and went to the grocery store on Asheville Highway, the Kroger before the interchange. I bought what was on the list and a few things that weren't. 2 chocolate bars Caleb liked, and that I bought when I remembered. An avocado that was at the perfect ripeness, and that I knew I'd let go bad before I used it. The avocado rotted on Tuesday. I was right about that. Ruth stopped me when I was unloading the car. She was on the sidewalk with Pesto on his leash. Or rather, she was standing on the sidewalk while Pesto stayed planted in one spot, snout in the air, refusing to move. "He won't go past the sidewalk since Thursday," Ruth said. "Normally he goes all the way to the end of the street at least." Pesto was looking toward the cul-de-sac, nose raised, nostrils working, not barking, just smelling, with that specific concentration of an animal processing something it doesn't understand. "Did you talk to Scott?" I asked. He said Ridge has been sleeping under the bed all week, hasn't done that since he was a puppy. I finished unloading the car and went inside. I didn't tell Ruth what I'd found in the backyard at number 44. Not because I was hiding it, just because I hadn't gotten anywhere with that information yet. And telling her there were marks on the fence and fur caught in the wood without having a conclusion felt like the kind of thing that would generate a week of conversations I didn't have the energy for. In the afternoon, Caleb went to his friend's house, a kid named Dre who lived 3 streets over, in the part of the subdivision that wasn't a cul-de-sac. I stayed with Priya, who spent the entire afternoon asking me to put together a 500-piece puzzle of a world map her grandmother had sent for her birthday, and that I knew would end up with pieces scattered across the living room rug for 2 weeks. We put it together, it ended with pieces scattered across the rug. At 5 in the afternoon, while Priya was napping, a nap she swore she didn't need but proved she did every time she closed her eyes for more than 10 minutes, I went to the back fence, just to look, just to compare. The fence was the same. There were no new marks I could identify. The mud at the 2 pressure points had partially dried. The shape was clearer now, but that only confirmed what I already knew about the spacing. Nothing new on the inside. Through the gaps between the boards, I could see the empty lot on the other side. Tall grass, a few fallen branches, what looked like the remains of some wooden structure that had once been something and wasn't anymore. The lot stretched about 50 yards before reaching a tree line that marked the beginning of an unnamed green area I'd never explored. It wasn't dense forest. It was the kind of secondary growth that comes up where someone stopped maintaining things. There was nothing visible in the lot, but there was a dead bird 2 yards from the fence on the inside, in my yard. A thrush, judging by the size and color. It was on the ground along the base of the fence with no visible signs of trauma I could see from a distance. Not crushed, not torn apart. It looked whole, but it was dead, and it hadn't been there that morning when I'd left for groceries, because I would have noticed. I went inside to get a disposable glove from the kitchen and came back. I picked up the bird carefully. It weighed what a thrush weighs, almost nothing. There were no bite marks I could identify, but something was wrong with the neck. Not broken exactly, more like compressed, as if it had been subjected to a pressure that wasn't focused enough to snap it but was enough to stop something important. I dropped the bird in a bag, sealed it, and threw it in the trash. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, scrubbing more than I needed to, which is a habit of mine when I'm thinking about something else. I looked out through the window above the sink while I washed. The backyard was empty. The fence was intact. A dead bird isn't evidence of anything. Birds die, cats kill birds and leave them in neighbors' yards for reasons that seem to make sense to cats. There were at least 4 loose cats in the neighborhood I could name off the top of my head, including a massive Persian belonging to the couple at number 22 that wandered the street with the kind of Olympic indifference of a cat that was never taught to be afraid of anything. But that compression on the neck wasn't what a cat does. I'd seen enough in images, not of birds but of compressed structures, to know that kind of pressure requires a large surface, a large paw, or something that isn't a paw but works in a similar way. I didn't say that to anyone. Caleb got back at 6:30 and went straight to his room to turn on the video game, and Priya woke up from her nap with the rug pattern pressed into her cheek and the face of someone who will not admit she slept. And I made pasta with tomato sauce, the one thing both of them ate without negotiation. While they ate, I stood looking out the kitchen window that faced the front street. The faint amber light of the street lamp, the band of shadow between my house and the cul-de-sac. The street was quiet, no movement. But the 2 dogs in the neighborhood hadn't made a single sound in 3 days. Pesto had stopped walking to the end of the sidewalk. Ridge was sleeping under a bed. Animals aren't infallible barometers, I know that. But animals respond to stimuli that humans don't process. Frequencies, smells, movement patterns. When an animal changes its behavior consistently, and with no apparent cause identifiable to humans, the simplest logic is that the stimulus exists, but is outside the range of human perception, not that the animal has lost its mind. I didn't say that to Ruth, but I thought it while washing the dishes after dinner with the kids in the living room watching television and the street outside too quiet for a Saturday night in October. Monday morning when I went out to put Caleb on the bus, I noticed the porch light at number 38 was broken. Not the bulb. The entire fixture was crooked, The metal arm bent downward as if someone had pulled it hard. The motion sensor was still blinking on and off, trying to process something, but the light wouldn't come on. Dennis Hara, who lived there, was heading to his car at the same time, and I pointed it out. He looked, frowned, said he had no idea when it had happened, that it was fine the night before. The bus came. Caleb got on without saying goodbye properly, which had been his standard behavior since he'd turned 9, and decided that goodbyes were for younger kids. I drove to work with that fixture in my head. The metal arm had been bent downward, not ripped off, not twisted, bent with vertical pressure. To do that to a porch light support arm, you'd need something applying force from the top down. A ladder, maybe, with someone on it, or something tall enough to reach up and press. The fixture was about 7 feet off the ground. I worked my shift, processed images, drank the terrible coffee from the third-floor break room that everyone complained about and nobody stopped drinking. At lunch, Marcus Odell sat down next to me in the cafeteria with a tray of chicken that smelled reasonably good, and asked why I had that look on my face. "What look?" I said. "The look of someone adding up a column and the number isn't coming out right." Marcus was 45 and had been an ultrasound tech for 20 years, and had that specific quality of people who spend decades looking at things that aren't immediately obvious. A patience with ambiguity that I recognized because I'd developed the same thing. I told him about the fence, the marks, the bird, the dogs. He listened without interrupting. Then he was quiet for a moment. "Have you called anyone? Animal control? Something like that?" I called 311 about a possible dead animal in the lot. 5 business days. That was when? Friday. He did the math in his head. So by Wednesday, maybe Thursday. Maybe. In the meantime, you're doing what? I didn't have a good answer for that. I was observing, I was documenting, I was checking the locks before bed. I wasn't doing what a reasonable person who genuinely believed they were at risk would do, which was call someone with more authority than 311. Because to call someone with more authority, I'd need to say there was a large animal in the area, and the immediate question would be what kind of animal, and I didn't have an answer for that. That wouldn't sound like the beginning of a story I didn't want to be telling. "Watching," I said. Marcus nodded like that was reasonable, which was one of the things I liked about him. Tuesday night, after the kids were in bed, I didn't take the trash out. It was trash night. I knew it was trash night, but I sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes with the black bag in my hand and didn't go. I left the bag in the garage and went back inside and sat with that for a while. The fact that I had changed a 6-year habit because of something I couldn't name with any precision, that bothered me more than it should have. Wednesday morning, the truck came and collected the bins that were at the curb. Mine stayed in the garage. The driver didn't stop to check, which was expected. Wednesday afternoon, Ruth called me. "Pesto died," she said. Steady voice, the voice of someone who had already cried and was now on the administrative side of grief. I found him this morning in the backyard, by the fence. I went to her house. Pesto was wrapped in an old towel on the kitchen table, waiting for the vet to come for pickup. Ruth had called the clinic and they were coming in the afternoon. I looked at Pesto without touching. 12 years old, arthritis, small breed. All of that was context for the natural death of an old dog. But Pesto was in the backyard. Ruth had said he hadn't left the front sidewalk in a week, that he'd stand there with his nose in the air pointing toward the cul-de-sac and wouldn't move forward. "Did he go out at night?" I asked. He shouldn't have. The back door was closed but not locked. He knows how to push it open with his nose. "Did you hear anything?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. She had her back to me, arranging something at the sink that didn't need arranging. "I heard a sound around 3 in the morning, she said. "I'm not sure how to describe it. It wasn't barking. It was a short sound, like when he got startled but muffled, you know? Like it started and stopped in the middle." I stayed with her until the vet arrived. Then I went home, picked up Priya from school, made dinner. That night, after the kids were asleep, I went to check my backyard with a flashlight. The fence was different. The board that had been bowed before now had a vertical crack running top to bottom. Not broken, but compromised. And there was a second board next to it that was loose at the base. The nails had been pushed outward, not pulled out. Pushed. from the outside in. I stood with the flashlight aimed at that for a while. There was a gap between the two compromised boards of maybe 5 inches. Not enough for much to get through, but enough to put something in, to check what was on the other side. I turned off the flashlight before I realized I'd turned it off. I stood in the dark of my backyard, still, not moving, listening. The October cold on my bare arms. The smell of wet leaves, and underneath it, fainter but present, the other smell. Meat, metal, something alive and large and close. There was no sound except my own breathing. I went back inside slowly, came in through the back door, closed it, locked it, leaned my back against it for a second in the dark of the kitchen. Then I went upstairs, walked to Caleb's room, opened the door carefully. He was sleeping face down with one arm hanging off the side of the bed, the way he'd slept since he was a baby. I went to Priya's room. She was bundled in her blanket with only her hair showing. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed. The fence was giving. It hadn't come through yet, but the fence was giving, and whatever was on the other side was testing it, consistently, patiently, with a logic that wasn't planning but was repetition, which is sometimes the same thing. I stayed awake until 4 in the morning. I didn't hear anything else that night. But Thursday morning, when I went to check again in daylight, there was a third loose board. The gap was now almost 10 inches wide. Thursday afternoon, I went to Scott Fenimore's house. I hadn't planned to go. I was coming back from school with Priya, who had spent the whole ride telling me about a fight between 2 classmates that involved a pink pencil and an injustice I couldn't quite follow. And when I drove past Scott's house and saw his car in the driveway, I stopped without thinking too much about it. Scott was a civil engineer, 41, divorced for 2 years, with a 13-year-old daughter who stayed with him on alternating weekends. He was the kind of person who fixed things before they broke and had firm opinions about backyard drainage. We weren't close, but we had the kind of neighbor relationship that works. He'd helped me replace a circuit breaker once. I'd signed for a package of his another time, nothing beyond that. He came to the door looking like he hadn't slept well. Ridge was behind him, and when the door opened, the dog took 2 steps back into the house instead of coming forward to sniff, which was the opposite of what German Shepherds normally do with visitors. "You got a minute?" I said. He did. He let Priya watch TV in the living room with Ridge, who went and lay down in the farthest corner from the window, and we stood in the kitchen. I told him everything. The fence, the marks, the fur, the bird, pesto, the bent fixture at number 38, the gap that was growing between the boards. Scott listened with his arms crossed, looking at the counter, with the expression of someone calculating structural load. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I know there's something out there," he said. "Ridge started acting up last week, but there was something Monday night that I didn't tell Ruth because I didn't want to scare her." I waited. At 2 in the morning, Ridge started growling. Not barking, as in growling, that low sound he makes when he's genuinely scared of something. I went to the bedroom window, which faces my backyard. He stopped, ran a hand over his face. There was something at the fence. "What did you see?" "Not clearly. The light in the neighbor's backyard behind me was off, and my flashlight didn't reach that far. But there was a shape. At the fence. Tall." "How tall?" He looked up at the kitchen ceiling, which was about 9 feet. About that. Maybe a little more. Leaning against the fence, but with part of its body above it. A 6-foot fence. Part of its body above it. "Did you take a picture?" I tried with my phone. Nothing came out, too dark. He uncrossed his arms. "Deanna, my lot borders the empty land. My fence is about 25 feet from yours." I knew that. I'd been running the geometry in my head since he started talking. Scott's lot sat on the curve of the cul-de-sac. His fence ran perpendicular to mine. If something was testing both fences, it was moving along the perimeter, systematically from one point to the next. "You have your daughter next weekend," I said. "I know. What are you thinking about doing?" He went to the kitchen window and looked out at his backyard for a moment. "I was thinking about reinforcing the fence. Bolts, double boards along the back section." He turned to look at me. "But if what you're describing is bowing treated wood and pushing nails out from the inside, I don't know that double boards are going to fix it." They wouldn't. I didn't say that, but he knew. "I'm going to call animal control directly," he said. "Not 311, the county office number." "Okay." I paused. "But what are you going to tell them it is?" He was quiet. It was the same wall I'd hit the week before. To get someone out, you need to name the problem. And naming the problem requires a category. And the category that the available facts pointed toward was one that neither of us was saying out loud. "I'll tell them there's a large animal with aggressive behavior in the vicinity of the subdivision," he said. "Doesn't have to be more specific than that." "Okay." I went to get Priya, who had fallen asleep on the couch with the remote in her hand and Ridge lying on the floor near her, which was the closest thing to normal behavior I'd seen from that dog in days. I carried her to the car without waking her, which was one of the physical skills I'd developed over 6 years of solo parenting, and that never stopped being useful. Friday morning, Scott called the Knox County Animal Control Office. They said they'd log it, and someone would be in touch. He texted me to let me know. Friday evening, Scott wasn't home. His car wasn't in the driveway when I drove past to pick up Priya from Ruth's. I figured he'd gone out for something. Dinner, groceries, whatever people do on a Friday. Saturday morning, the car still wasn't there. I texted at 10. Nothing. At 2 in the afternoon. Nothing. I went to his door at 4, knocked. Ridge barked once from inside. A sharp bark, different from the growling before, and stopped. There was no other sound. I knocked again. Nothing. The door wasn't locked. I pushed and it opened because Scott never locked the door when he was home. It was a habit of his that he'd mentioned once as something he'd carried over from growing up in a small town. "Scott?" I called from the doorway. Ridge appeared in the hallway, tail low, but he came to me and pressed his nose into my hand, which is the closest thing to a request for help a dog can make. I went in. The kitchen was the way I'd seen it on Thursday. Clean, organized, with a half-finished cup of coffee on the counter. The cup was cold. The coffee had that film that forms after hours of sitting out. I walked down the hallway. Living room, bathroom, bedroom. Empty, empty, empty. The back door was open. I walked toward it slowly. Scott's backyard was smaller than mine, with a tool shed in the corner and the back fence about 25 feet out. The fence was intact. The yard was empty, but there was something on the ground near the back door. The flashlight Scott kept in the kitchen, one of those big ones with a long handle, that he'd probably grabbed to go check something in the yard. It was on the concrete step, off, with the handle slightly bent as if it had fallen from a certain height. Outside the step, there was a stain on the concrete. Dark, irregular, maybe 12 inches across. I crouched down and looked without touching. I didn't need to touch it to know what it was. 15 years of seeing what the human body contains on the inside develops an immediate recognition. I stayed crouched there for a moment I couldn't estimate. Then I went inside, took Ridge by the collar, closed the back door, and called 911. The police arrived in 11 minutes. 2 cars, 3 officers, and then another car carrying the on-call detective, a man around 50 named Reyes who had the slow drawl of East Tennessee and who had me sit in Scott's living room while the others checked the backyard. I told him what I knew. The fence, the marks, pesto, the light fixture. I didn't say werewolf because I had never used that word, not even inside my own head. I said large animal with aggressive behavior in the vicinity of the subdivision, which was Scott's language and was now mine too. Reyes wrote everything down without any particular expression. Asked if I had the photos. I sent them to his number right there. "Does Mr. Fenimore have family?" he asked. "A 13-year-old daughter. She stays with him on alternating weekends." I did the math. "This isn't her weekend." "Thank God," he said. And it was the first thing he'd said that wasn't neutral. I took Ridge home because there was no immediate alternative, and because the dog wasn't going to stay in a house with an open back door and a stain on the step. I called Ruth and explained enough for her to know it wasn't a domestic accident and wasn't anything she needed to investigate on her own. She was quiet for a long moment and then said she was going to stay inside. Caleb and Priya were in the living room when I got home. Caleb looked at Ridge with the immediate interest of a 9-year-old in the presence of any dog, and I said Ridge was going to stay with us for a while and that there was no need for any explanation beyond that. Priya asked if he bit. I said no. She went and sat next to him on the rug. I made dinner. Pasta again because it was the path of least resistance and because I needed my head available for other things, while my body did something mechanical. I put the kids to bed at 9. Priya took longer because she wanted Ridge to sleep in her room. And I said no, and she said please. And I said no again. And she fell asleep without Ridge, but with her bedroom door open so she could hear him if he made any sound, which was the kind of negotiation that felt like defeat but was technically a win. Ridge stayed in the kitchen. He lay down on the rug near the garage door and was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Searched. Large predators, Tennessee, Knox County animal sightings. Found records of coyotes, 1 or 2 mountain lion reports in the areas further east toward the Smoky Mountains. Nothing relevant to an East Knoxville subdivision with 42 houses and 6-foot fences. I closed the laptop. At 11 at night, Ridge lifted his head. He wasn't growling, wasn't barking. He just raised his head from where he was lying and held his ears up straight, looking at the kitchen door that opened to the backyard. He stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then he put his head back down and closed his eyes. I had stayed completely still during those 30 seconds. After another 10 minutes or so, I went to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. Dark, quiet, the back fence barely visible without direct light. Nothing, but the smell was there. Faint, coming in under the door. That meat and metal smell I'd already cataloged and filed away, and now recognized immediately. The way I recognize the smell of iodine contrast before I even see the bottle. I went back to the table. I didn't call Reyes because I had nothing new to tell him beyond the fact that my borrowed dog had lifted his head, and I'd smelled something. It wasn't enough. Still not enough. At 20 to midnight, Ridge lifted his head again. This time he was growling. Low, continuous, the sound Scott had described. Not the alert growl, the genuine fear growl that's different, that comes from somewhere deeper. I stood up, held still in the middle of the kitchen. The sound was coming from the left side of the house, not from the backyard, from the side. The narrow corridor between my house and the left neighbor's fence, which opened out to the front street. I went to the living room window which faced the side of the house. I pressed against the wall before reaching the window and looked at an angle without putting myself directly in front of the glass. The side corridor was dark. The streetlight reached the start of the passage but didn't make it to the far end. There was something in the shadowed section. I didn't see a complete shape. I saw movement, not fast, slow, the kind of movement of something adjusting its position. And I saw height. The side of my house has about 3 feet of clearance between the wall and the neighbor's fence, and whatever was there filled that width. It didn't fit comfortably. It was compressed in that space, and still the top of it was above the line of the side window, which sat about 6.5 feet off the ground. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the movement stopped. Ridge had stopped growling. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no background hum of the city. Nothing. The kind of silence that isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of something that suppresses the sound around it. I went into the hallway, walked upstairs slowly, without turning on any lights. Went to Caleb's room, asleep. Went to Priya's room, asleep with the door open as negotiated, blanket up to her chin. I went back to the upstairs hallway and stood still. The sound started from below. It was hard to describe. Not a knock, not a scratch. It was pressure. The sound of something being pressed steadily against a surface, like wood protesting under weight. It was coming from the side of the house, at ground level. The side wall, the thin drywall that separated the inside of the house from the 3-foot wide corridor outside. It lasted about 8 seconds, stopped. Then it started again, about 3 feet further along, as if it was testing the length of the wall, point by point. I went downstairs, picked up my phone, called Reyes. He picked up on the 3rd ring, sounding like someone who wasn't sleeping. "There's something on the side of my house right now," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Working along the wall, drywall wall, 3-foot corridor between my house and the neighbor's fence. Are you locked in?" "Yes, kids. Sleeping upstairs. Don't turn on any outside lights. Don't open any windows. I'm sending a unit right now." "Okay." I stood in the dark hallway with my phone in my hand. Ridge was next to me, pressed against my leg, his full 65 pounds telling me there was only one safe direction, and it was away from that wall. The pressure sound started again, closer to the front door now. Testing, advancing, getting closer. I went back upstairs, closed Caleb's door without making noise, closed Priya's door, which she was going to complain about in the morning. Sat down in the hallway between the two bedrooms with Ridge beside me and my phone in my hand, and waited the 10 minutes it would take for the unit to arrive. The sounds stopped before the unit got there. The police swept the perimeter with flashlights and found nothing except a long mark along the side of the house. The vinyl siding paint dented in an uneven pattern over about 6 feet, as if something had dragged itself slowly along it, testing the resistance. The officer who showed me the mark didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Detective Reyes is going to want to see this in the morning." Reyes came Sunday morning with a man he introduced as being from the State Wildlife Management Service. A guy around 40 named Pruitt, short hair, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency jacket, who examined the mark on the vinyl siding without touching it, and then stayed quiet for a stretch too long to be normal assessment. "What type of animal are you considering?" I asked. Pruitt looked at Reyes before answering. "We're looking at a few possibilities." It was the answer of someone who had an answer and had decided not to give it. They installed a monitoring camera on the side of the house, aimed at the corridor. A second camera in my backyard, covering the fence. They left a direct number for Pruitt and said to call immediately if I heard anything. Said they were going to increase patrols in the area. They didn't say what they were looking for. When they left, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking at the street. Harrogate Circle was too quiet for a Sunday morning. Normally there were at least 2 or 3 neighbors out. Someone washing a car, someone walking a dog, someone raking leaves. That Sunday there was no one. Either people had heard the police cars the night before and were inside waiting for information, or there was some other reason for the street to be empty. I sent the kids to Ruth's with instructions to stay there all day. Ruth didn't ask why. She'd heard the sirens the night before and had that quality of someone who understands when it's not time for questions. I spent Sunday watching the camera feeds through the app Pruitt had set up. The backyard empty. The corridor empty. Nothing. Monday I called the hospital and took the day off. I said it was personal, which was true. Monday afternoon, Reyes called to say they had found no trace of Scott Fenimore, that the investigation was ongoing, that I should let him know if I planned to leave home for any extended period. I didn't ask what counted as extended. I didn't ask what they really thought had happened to Scott. Monday night I put the kids to bed at 8:30, which was too early, and Caleb protested, and I said that's how it is tonight without giving a reason. Closed all the upstairs windows. Checked the door locks twice. Ridge stayed in the upstairs hallway instead of the kitchen, which was his choice and one I didn't argue with. At 10 at night, the camera app sent a notification. Camera 2, backyard, motion detected. I opened the app with completely steady hands, which surprised me. The image was black and white, grainy, with the artificial brightness of night vision. The back fence was visible, the compromised boards on the left side of the frame. And there was something on the other side. You couldn't see it completely. You never could see it completely. The camera reached to the fence, and what lay beyond stayed in the dark outside its range. But there was a shape, parts of it, what looked like a shoulder, too wide with a strange articulation, sitting higher than it should have been relative to the rest. And below that, at fence level, something pressing against the loose boards. The boards gave, not all at once, slowly, the wood flexing before splitting, 2 pieces falling inward into the yard with a sound I heard from inside the house, even with the windows closed. A dry sound, wood and nail. There was now a gap of almost 20 inches in the fence. I called Pruitt. 2 rings, voicemail, called Reyes 3 rings. Camera 2, I said when he picked up. The fence gave, something is entering my backyard right now. Get out of the house, he said. Front door car, out of the neighborhood. I have 2 kids sleeping upstairs, 2 seconds of silence. How long to wake them and get downstairs? I did the math. Priya woke up disoriented and took a minute to function. Caleb woke up fast but would ask questions. 3 minutes if I move fast. "Get a unit there now," he said, talking to someone on his end. "Deanna, can you get to them without going through the side or the back?" "Stairs, hallway, their rooms, back down the stairs, front door." "Yes." "Do that, slow, quiet, no lights. I'll stay on the line." I went up the stairs with my phone in my hand, and Rhea's breathing on the other end. Ridge was in the upstairs hallway, standing, ears straight up, looking at the window at the far end of the hallway that faced the backyard. He wasn't growling. He was absolutely still and absolutely quiet. I went into Priya's room, crouched next to her bed, put my hand on her shoulder, shook gently. Priya, wake up." She opened her eyes with that disorientation of a child pulled out of deep sleep. "Mom, we're going out to the car. Right now. Real quiet." "Why?" "Because I need you to come. Grab your blanket if you want." She grabbed the blanket. I went to Caleb's room. He was awake before I reached the bed. He had that light sleep of a kid who sleeps with one ear open. "Mom, what happened?" "I need you to come downstairs with me and get in the car. No shoes, there's no time." "But, Caleb..." I said it quietly, but he understood the tone. He got up, all three of us in the hallway, Ridge right beside us, pressed against my leg. We moved to the stairs. That's when the sound started from below. Pressure against the back door, not knocking, steady, building pressure, the door wood flexing, the lock rattling in the frame. A slow organic sound that was worse than any knock because it suggested patience. Suggested something that understood the door would give if it waited long enough. Priya squeezed my hand. She didn't make a sound. Caleb stood at the top of the stairs looking down. "Caleb," I said into his ear as quietly as I could. "Front door. Straight there. Don't stop. Don't look toward the kitchen hallway. You hold Priya's hand." He nodded, took Priya's hand. We went down. All three of us, Ridge behind. The back door was rattling steadily now. There was a sound alongside the pressure. Breathing. Heavy, rhythmic, coming from something large on the other side of the wood. And that smell coming through the gap. Meat and metal and something alive and too close. We went through the living room hallway. I didn't look toward the kitchen hallway. I reached the front door, undid the lock, opened it. The cold night air. "Car," I said. "Run." They ran. I went after them with the keys already in my hand. I'd grabbed them off the hook by the door, automatic habit. I don't know when I decided to do that. Unlocked the car, both of them got in. Ridge jumped into the back seat on top of Caleb, who complained out loud for the first time since he'd woken up. I got in, started the engine, pulled out of the garage without closing it. On the street, accelerating toward the neighborhood exit, I looked in the rearview mirror. The back door of my house was open. Not broken in, open as if the lock had simply given way. And in the faint light coming from the kitchen there was a shape in the doorway. Parts of it, a shoulder, the line of something moving inside. I didn't see the face, I didn't see the whole of it. 60% at most, and that was more than I needed. Priya was in the back seat wrapped in her blanket asking where we were going. And I said we were going to sleep at Marcus's house, which was true. Which I had called him to arrange without quite noticing when. Caleb was quiet the whole drive. When we got to Marcus's place, which was on the west side of town near Fort Loudon Lake, and the kids went to the guest room, Caleb stopped before going in and looked at me. "Mom, what was that?" I looked at him for a moment. 9 years old, eyes completely wide open, no trace of sleep left in them. "I don't know," I said. It was true. He nodded like that was enough for now, and went into the room. I went to Marcus's kitchen, sat down, and stared at my hands for a while. They were steady. They had been steady the whole time, and only now, sitting in a kitchen that smelled like old coffee and a single man's apartment, did I realize I was shaking on the inside in a way that didn't show on the surface. The unit arrived at Harrogate at 11:14 p.m., as Reyes informed me by text. They found nothing inside the house. But the back door was open, and there were marks on the kitchen linoleum, deep, irregular, from something that had come in and then gone back out the same way. I stayed at Marcus's place for 11 days. He had a guest room with a queen bed where both kids slept together. Priya on one side and Caleb on the other, with a pillow in the middle that he'd put there the first night, and that stayed there for all 11 days. Marcus slept on the couch without complaining, which is the kind of thing you find out about a person when a situation forces the discovery. He brought me coffee the first morning without asking how I took it and got it right. Black, no sugar, because we'd known each other for 6 years and sometimes people pay more attention than you realize. The kids didn't ask the big questions in the first few days. Priya asked when they were going home, and I said soon, which was an answer that worked for a few days before it needed to be replaced. Caleb didn't ask anything. He stayed in Marcus's room playing on the tablet with headphones on, which was his way of processing things he didn't yet have the language to process. I recognized that in him because it was what I did too, only with work instead of video games. I went back to the hospital the following Wednesday. Marcus drove me and picked me up, which I let happen without arguing because arguing would have required energy I didn't have. Reyes called 3 times that week. The investigation into Scott Fenimore was ongoing. They had found more evidence in the empty lot behind the subdivision. He didn't specify what kind, and I didn't ask, because there was a level of detail beyond which information stopped being useful and started being something else. They said Pruitt and his team had set traps in the lot and in the green area behind it. Said they were monitoring. They didn't say what they were looking for. They kept not saying. In the second week, I went to Harrogate once during the day, with Reyes meeting me there. The back door had been replaced, thicker, with a metal reinforcement, installed by the insurance company after the incident was filed. The kitchen was intact except for the marks on the linoleum, which the insurance company was also going to cover. The rest of the house was the way I'd left it. The dishes I hadn't washed before leaving, Caleb's jacket on the hook by the entrance, the world map puzzle still partially assembled on the living room rug with the pieces Priya hadn't managed to fit. I stood in the living room doorway looking at the puzzle for a while. Then I left without taking much of anything. Just clothes, documents, Caleb's tablet charger that he had specifically asked for. Reyes walked me to my car. "Do you have plans for the property?" "Not yet," he nodded. "When you do, let me know." A pause. Better not to be here at night for the time being. I wasn't planning on it. In the third week, the conversation started about what the neighbors had seen. Not with me directly. I heard through Ruth, who called every day and was my connection to what was happening on Harrogate while I wasn't there. Dennis Hara had told the police that Monday night he'd seen something on the roof of the empty house at number 44. He wasn't sure. He didn't have his glasses on, but there had been a large shape he'd initially interpreted as a fallen branch, until he realized branches don't change position. The woman at number 36 had said her 7-year-old son woke up Monday night saying he'd seen a very tall man looking in through his bedroom window, second-floor window. She'd checked and found nothing, and had put her son back to bed thinking it was a nightmare, and had only mentioned it to the police after the incident at my house. Ruth told me these things with the careful voice of someone assembling a picture for another person and wanting to make sure the pieces are in the right order. Then she was quiet for a moment. "Deanna," she said, "what do you think it was?" I was quiet for a while. It was the question I'd been not answering, including to myself as a matter of functionality. There were practical things to do, kids to stabilize, work to get back to, and keeping that question open allowed me to operate without the weight of an answer I didn't know how to carry. "I can't put a name to it," I said, which was true. "But you have an idea." "I have an idea." Ruth didn't ask me to say it out loud. That was kind of her. Pruitt called Thursday of the third week, said the traps had captured nothing, that there were signs of presence in the green area, compressed vegetation, marks on tree trunks at heights inconsistent with any known local wildlife, some biological evidence that was being analyzed. Said the area was being monitored and that I'd be informed of any developments. I asked directly, "Do you know what it is?" 3 seconds of silence. "We're working with a few hypotheses." "That's not an answer." "No, ma'am, it's not." Another pause. "What I can say is that the evidence doesn't correspond to any animal we have on record in this region." After that call, I went to Marcus's bathroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the tub and stayed there for about 15 minutes, not doing anything in particular. I didn't cry. I'm not sure what I did. I was processing something that had no available category, which is the hardest kind of thing to process for someone who spends their whole career working with categories. Marcus knocked on the door after a while. "Coffee?" "Yes," I said. I came out, drank the coffee, helped Priya with her math homework that she hated, watched an episode of something on television with Caleb without paying attention to what it was. In the 4th week, Ruth called with a different voice, firmer. "The realty company listed 3 houses on the street today. Number 36, number 40, and mine. Yours?" "I'm going to my daughter's in Chattanooga." A short pause. "I should have gone when Pesto died." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Ruth, I know, but I'm 74 years old and I don't have a dog anymore, and I don't want to stay on a street where I can't sleep." "You're 74. 64. But I feel 74 on this street right now." I went to Harrogate 2 days later to meet with a realtor. Not to sell, not yet, to assess. The realtor was a young guy around 28 in a suit that was slightly too big for him, who had prepared a comparative market analysis he wanted to show me on his tablet. We walked through the house, he took notes. When we got to the kitchen, he stood looking at the marks on the linoleum for a moment. "Big dog?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. He wrote something down. Didn't ask anything else. On the way out, he said the area market was stable, that 3 houses listed at the same time on the same street might put slight pressure on the price, but that the location near Asheville Highway and the quality of the subdivision offset that. He said it with the confidence of someone who believes location and quality are the primary variables. I listened to him all the way through, thanked him, said I'd be in touch. I went to the car, sat down, looked at the street through the window for a while. Harrogate Circle was quiet. Some of the porch lights the neighbors had left on as a safety measure were still on in the daytime, the timers out of sync. The grass at number 44's front yard was even taller. Scott's house with the blind slightly crooked in one of the upstairs windows, something I'd never noticed before. I had lived there for 6 years. I knew the way the light hit the houses in the afternoon. I knew the sound the sidewalk grate made when the garbage truck rolled over it. I knew that Pesto barked at everything, and Ridge never barked at anything, and that Ruth always had a pan of something baked waiting when you knocked on her door. I started the car, pulled off the street without looking in the rear-view mirror. 14 months later, I'm sitting in a different kitchen writing this. The kitchen is smaller than the one at Harrogate. It's on the 2nd floor of a rented townhouse in the Sequoia Hills neighborhood, near the Tennessee River, on a street with old trees and houses that don't look like each other. No cul-de-sac, no standardized fence. The windows open onto an open street and a small backyard with a maple tree that Priya has decided is hers, and that Caleb respects that jurisdiction for reasons that were never made clear. I haven't sold the Harrogate house yet. It's rented to a childless couple who work at the university hospital, and who didn't ask me about the marks on the linoleum because the insurance company replaced the floor before they ever saw it. They send the rent every month on time and have never reported anything unusual, which is the most useful and most unsettling information I currently have about that street. Pruitt called me twice in the last 14 months. The first time to say the traps had been pulled after 90 days without a capture. The second time, 3 months ago, to say a report was being finalized and that I would be among the people notified when it was complete. I haven't received notification yet. I stopped waiting around the 10th month. Scott Fenimore was never found. The investigation was formally reclassified from missing person to open case, which is the language the system uses when it has nothing left to do with an absence, but still has no body. His daughter, whose name is Amber, is 13 and lives with her mother in Nashville now. I know that because Reyes kept me updated on the basics, which I asked him to do and which he did without questioning. I think about Scott sometimes. The coffee cup with hours-old film on it. The flashlight fallen on the step. The fact that he went to check something in the backyard in the middle of the night alone with a flashlight, which was exactly the kind of thing a pragmatic civil engineer would do, and that it was enough. Ruth is in Chattanooga with her daughter. We call once a month, sometimes less. She's doing well. She has a new garden, grandkids nearby. She finally went to the doctor to deal with a knee problem she'd been putting off for 2 years. The last time we talked, she mentioned she'd adopted an old cat from a neighbor who was moving into a care home, and that the cat slept in the bed with her and that it was more company than she'd expected. She didn't mention Harrogate. Neither did I. Marcus asked me to be his girlfriend formally 4 months ago, which is a phrase I hadn't used since my 20s, and that he said with the full seriousness of someone who knows exactly what he's doing. I said yes after 2 days of thinking, which he waded through without asking why it was taking so long. He still lives at Fort Loudoun Lake. We're not living together, but Priya already knows the full name of his favorite song, and Caleb once asked him to help with a science project, which for a 9-year-old boy is the equivalent of a formal declaration of approval. Caleb never brought up what that thing was again. He asked once that night and accepted the I don't know. But 3 months ago he was doing a school research project on Tennessee wildlife and came to show me something on his tablet screen, a list of the state's mammals, nothing relevant. And while I was looking at it, he said, without looking at me, in a very low voice, "Mom, that thing wasn't on this list, was it?" I looked at the list for a moment. Black bears, coyotes, otters, foxes, martens, raccoons, possums, deer, mountain lions along the Smoky Mountains border. "No," I said. He nodded, closed the tablet, went to his room. We haven't talked about it since. Priya didn't ask anything directly, but she spent about 2 months sleeping with the light on, which I let go without comment, and then stopped sleeping with the light on without announcing it, which I also let go without comment. She still has the maple tree in the backyard. Last week she hung a bird feeder on it that she made in art class out of plywood and blue paint, with an entry hole too wide for most birds but perfect according to her, for the size of bird she wants to attract. I don't know what bird that is. I didn't ask. I think about the fence sometimes, about the gap that kept growing, 5 inches, 10 inches, 20, about the patience of it, about something that doesn't plan but repeats, and in the repetition produces a result that looks like planning. I think about the smell. It's the detail that stays with me most clearly, more than any image. Meat and metal, and something underneath it I was never quite able to name completely. Sometimes when I walk through the butcher section of a grocery store, any grocery store, not necessarily the Kroger on Asheville, I stop for a second before I keep walking. Marcus asked me once what that was about. I said it was nothing. He didn't push. There's one thing I haven't told anyone. Not Reyes, not Pruitt, not Marcus. The night I left Harrogate, when we were in the car pulling out of the garage, and I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the open door and the shape in the doorway. There was a second of visibility before I turned the corner and lost the angle. A second in which the kitchen light was enough. I didn't see a face. I saw a posture. The shape was still in the open doorway, part of its body inside and part outside, and there was something about the way it was standing. Not the movement of something that has entered and is exploring. Not the posture of a predator giving chase. It was something else. It was the way something stands when it's watching where you went. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if there was intention in the sense we apply to that word. I don't know if what I interpreted as watching had any component that deserved that name. I may be assigning human categories to behavior that has no human category. But it's what I saw. And it's what stays. Priya turns 7 next month. She wants a bird-themed party, which is consistent with her current phase. Caleb turns 10 in March and has already announced he wants an electronic gift and that he'll send me a link to his list, which is an administrative development I appreciated. I work, I take care of the kids, I see Marcus on Wednesdays and weekends. I call Ruth once a month. It's a life that works. It's a life I put back together in the same place it's always been, just with a different address. Sometimes at night when the street outside is quiet in the right way, I lie down and listen to the silence for a moment before I fall asleep. The silence in Sequoia Hills is different. It has more texture. The crickets, the cars on Tennessee River Road, a neighbor who plays piano late into the night with the window open in the summer. When the silence has texture like that, I sleep. On the nights when the silence goes too smooth, I stay awake a little longer, but I stay inside.